Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new, my name is Paul Oneid. I'm the head coach at Master Athletic Performance and the founder of Coach's Corner University. And we're here to talk about something that I've spoken about on a number of occasions. I've done a couple of videos on how I eat in a day or how I fuel for hybrid performance. And today we're going to get into a bit of the nuance. So like I mentioned, going to be making some more talking head videos and discussing the X's and O's about the physiology and the psychology behind the decisions that I make with my clients and with myself to help us perform at the highest level. Today, we're going to be talking about metabolic adaptation, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a phenomenal understanding of, number one, what metabolic adaptation is, how to better plan your nutrition when it comes to fat loss or muscle gain, and why it's not simply about calories in and calories out, because your body has a phenomenal way of keeping score and a phenomenal way of holding checks and balances to make sure that you don't die. And that's what metabolic adaptation is. So let's get into it. The first thing we're going to talk about with metabolic adaptation is energy flux manipulation. So essentially how we manipulate the equation of calories in and calories out. And I've discussed this within Coach's Corner University in a number of different modules. So we're just going to go over it kind of, I'm not going to say briefly because this is going to be a longer video, but we're going to talk about everything relating to metabolic adaptation and how it relates to fluctuating or creating a flux in your energy intake and the energy that you're burning. What that means is what your body does when you take in more calories than you burn, and what your body does when you take in less calories than you burn. So when the calories in and calories out do not equate, what happens? So we'll talk about metabolic adaptation, we'll talk about fatigue and lifestyle, we'll talk about goals, timelines, and controls. We'll talk about fat loss, muscle gain, and then how to apply this practically within your nutrition or the nutrition of your clients. A quick framework before we start. So this is the X's and O's of what to do once someone's bought in. This doesn't take into account the psychology of nutrition. So if that is something that you're interested in, I'm definitely going to cover that in a separate module. Today, we're going to get into the levers, the timelines, and the decision-making process. So like I mentioned, we're going to cover 5 modules today. So module 1 is going to be metabolic adaptation, what it is and the lens that we look at it through. We're going to talk about fatigue and lifestyle, how sleep, sun, movement, and stress shape recovery on both sides of energy in and energy out. We'll talk about goals, timelines, and controls, essentially what rate of change is actually realistic and what rate of change is going to be the best for us and our clients to be able to perform at the highest level, because performance is the number one variable that we're worried about. And then lastly, practical application. So how to make decisions within real time with the information that you're gathering from yourself or your athlete, what to track, what not to track, and how to use that information. So metabolic adaptation is the concept that calories in is influenced by calories out and vice versa. People hear metabolic adaptation, they assume that the metabolism slows down. That's actually not really true. What's really happening is the body has physiological contingencies in place to defend homeostasis. And what that means is it's going to prevent you from dying. So if you are in a caloric deficit, your body thinks that it is starving. When you are in a caloric surplus, it is going to have certain processes in place to prevent, to save that energy for the next famine. Right? So, the law of conservation of energy applies within this survival system. The body finds ways to handle lower demands. And if you want to have higher outputs, it does everything it can to store that energy for later. So when you're dieting, it basically just said, dieting for muscle gain or muscle or fat loss, there are physiological and behavioral situations that your body will create to make sure that you can still function and that you don't die and that you're prepared for later. And this involves a number of different mechanisms, both with regards to your behaviors as well as your hormones and neurotransmitters. They all play a role. 3 goals the body handles automatically. 1, prevent death, right? Below all conscious control, the deepest signal that your body has is don't die. The next is prevent significant weight loss. Your body is going to defend its existing set point. There is some research around set point theory that proves that you can kind of change that over time, but your body does have a comfortable set point of body weight, body fat percentage that it functions the highest at. And this is going to be different for every person. For example, when I was powerlifting, I tended to perform better when I had a higher body fat percentage. Now that I'm, running, living life, my body fat percentage tends to remain lower despite fluctuations in my energy intake. And the third is conserve energy in a surplus. So whenever there's an abundance of calories, evolutionarily speaking, we are preparing for famine, and the body is paranoid by the way that we evolved. So it's going to put everything in place to make sure that you store that body fat for the next time that ice age comes, or that, shortage of food comes, whatever, environmental situation you find yourself in, it's going to protect you from it. And every nutritional intervention that we put in place, whether it be to gain muscle or to lose fat, you're in a situation where you're fighting physiology. Okay. And that's why coaching is so important, because that will play into how you coach the psychology of a client during that time, and also the decisions you make around what interventions you put in. So there's 6 systems that push back the moment a deficit or a surplus starts. So we'll talk deficit here first. Number 1, NEAT drops. So your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So the ways in which your body burns energy that don't involve structured exercise. You're going to fidget less, you're going to stand less, you're going to park closer to wherever you're going, you're going to take the elevator instead of the stairs. Energy out falls automatically. I even remember when I was dieting for a show, I would start speaking quieter and more slowly, simply because my body did not want to burn energy. The next is your thermic effect of food drops. So when you take in food, your body burns energy to metabolize it. Because you're eating less food, there is less thermal cost. And the math gets a little bit worse as that deficit comes down. The next is your training will likely decline. And this is what we want to protect against at all costs. So if your training intensity or duration drops, you're going to have less fuel utilization, less stimulus. You're going to have less propensity to maintain your muscle, and you're going to burn less calories from those sessions. This is where it gets important. Is hunger is going to go sky high. You're going to have reduced gut mechanoreceptor signaling, meaning that your stomach will stretch less. Leptin levels will drop. Ghrelin levels will rise, essentially signaling that, hey, we need food. And this signaling between leptin and ghrelin is actually the basis for the body weight set point theory. We're not going to get into that today, but it's just important to understand. And the next is there are a shift in hormones. Insulin comes down because your fasted blood glucose goes down. Cortisol comes up because your body is stressed that you're dieting and trying to kill it. Plus, cortisol is also a fuel mobilizer. The next is thyroid output will drop. Testosterone will drop. Those two are highly linked to carbohydrate intake. So when your carbohydrate intake drops, those two hormones drop and your resting metabolic rate will come down. Gut, mood, sleep. There's evidence that increased gut efficiency and less proton leakage takes place when you're dieting. The gut flora shifts, serotonin and dopamine drop, and then cortisol disrupts your sleep. This isn't your body being lazy or that you having a lack of willpower. This is your body's protective mechanism. It is a metabolic adaptation to reduced food intake. Now, the mirror image, okay, those same 6 systems. NEAT is going to rise when you take in more calories. So you're going to have more energy, there's more fuel available, you're going to move more. But if you push too far into a surplus, it actually flips. And this happens for a few different reasons, which we'll get into. But as you gain more and more weight, your body will start to feel fatigued, you'll have lethargy, and you'll move less. So there's a happy medium where you're fueled enough that your performance is sky high and you're running on all cylinders. But everyone who's tried to gain weight in a meaningful amount of weight in a short-ish amount of time knows that you can push too far, and then you cross over that edge. Training output is going to climb. You're going to have more stimulus. You're going to accumulate more muscle mass. You want to take advantage of this window. But if your weight gain gets too aggressive, your training performance can come down. Again, anyone who's gained weight over a significant period of time knows, back pumps, your ability to sustain higher level efforts, your cardio will decrease. that's a signal that it's probably time to reverse out of that, and you've pushed too far. Hunger will actually invert. So because you have higher resting insulin levels, your leptin will go up, your ghrelin will come down. You're gonna feel that bloated, distended stomach feeling. That's always going to decrease hunger, and that's why people talk about force feeding when they're trying to bulk. This is, the hormone piece is where you're actually doing yourself a service, right? Thyroid will climb, testosterone will climb, cortisol will come down. But then when you gain too much body fat, the inverse will happen. So that is the key. Body fat is the key, and insulin seems to govern this process. As you gain more body fat, you become more insulin resistant. So your partitioning of nutrients translates less towards muscle and more towards fat. This prolonged surplus will blunt insulin sensitivity. Hyperinsulinemia shifts your partitioning towards fat. When it comes to your gut, mood, and sleep, you'll have better serotonin and dopamine, better sleep, better well-being, until that body fat starts to rise, and then that will bring down the quality here. And in some cases, like my big boys, you might get sleep apnea. Worth the risk if you want to be super jacked. So the big picture takeaway here with metabolic adaptation is we are fighting against our bodies. Calories in and calories out don't exist in a vacuum. When you take in more calories, calories in goes up, calories out will also come up. Same thing when you increase an exercise output with cardio, higher training, and you take in less carbohydrates and less calories, your body's adaptive process will decrease your resting metabolic rate through decreases in NEAT, etc. So every tool on here that we're going to discuss is a way to hack your physiology. Okay, it's a way to work against these metabolic adaptations, and that's the lens that we're going to look through every decision that we make. So both directions are stressors, and it's important to understand this. So energy flux influences fatigue accumulation and fatigue decay, and any disruption to homeostasis is a stressor. Fat loss is a stressor because it decreases recovery potential because you have less fuel. Your cortisol is rising to mobilize more of your stored fuels. Your sleep quality will often suffer, and test and thyroid will come down. Muscle gain, also a stressor, just different. You're going to have higher training outputs to recover from, higher caloric demands on that insulin sensitivity. Digestion will tend to struggle because there's an increased load, and high stress typically means higher insulin as well. So higher insulin means you'll become less sensitive to it over time. Both have to be managed through lifestyle, not just through the diet. And this is the broader scope of what we're talking about today. Sleep is going to be your foundation, and sleep hygiene is very, very important. I actually published a study on sleep with my friend, Dr. Brogan Williams, phenomenal researcher out of New Zealand, good friend of mine. And what we found is consistency matters more than the total, meaning that the same bedtime, same wake time will actually result in better outcomes than, say you're getting 6 hours of sleep every night and it's the same 6 hours. You will have better outcomes than if you had 8 hours, but it was staggered and different every night. That stabilizes your circadian rhythm, which stabilizes insulin and stabilizes cortisol fluctuations during the day. Make sure that you're sleeping in a cold, dark room, and cut your caffeine off about 6 to 8 hours before bedtime. And ideally wait about 60 minutes after waking to allow your natural cortisol levels to rise, because caffeine right when you wake up can interfere with that cortisol pulse and throw off your bedtime later in the day. You're going to want to eat about 2 hours before bedtime, typically a lighter meal, higher in carbohydrates to influence serotonin production, and a regular meal schedule helps too. Alcohol will kill your sleep. It decreases REM sleep. It decreases protein synthesis. So if you're drinking alcohol, you're just killing your gains. I will just plain and simple. I advocate for no alcohol consumption, but should you choose to indulge once in a while, it's not going to kill you. You just have to be able to prepare for the trade-offs inherent in that decision. This is where it gets a bit tricky. The science will say 30 to 60 minutes before bed. no screens, unload your to-do list, do some journaling, do some reading, wind down. This isn't always possible. I'll be a hypocrite if I say that I avoid screens 30 to 60 minutes. What I do is I watch my TV and I turn the backlight on the TV way down. So at least I'm not like bombarding myself with light. We also have the TV relatively far away from our bed, and that's how I wind down. Whatever you do, just put yourself in a good position to wind down before bed. Allow your body to relax. Bonus points here: have a hot shower, maybe drink some tea, anything that you can do to bring your core temperature down. Okay. Movement is the lowest hanging fruit. In my opinion, movement should be standardized at all times. So whether you're dieting and you want to make sure that you maintain your NEAT by maintaining a step count, we are going to do that. In a surplus, we're going to keep our steps stable so that we take advantage of the insulin sensitivity that we get from our steps. Regardless, we need to do our steps. It should be stable. So movement going to be the lowest hanging fruit. Not structured training, just more moving, more walking throughout the day. Track your steps. It's also going to increase your calorie expenditure, improve your insulin sensitivity, improve your digestion, lower the risk of metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular events, and all-cause mortality. People who walk more tend to live longer, healthier lives, plain and simple. But when dieting, it's going to attenuate that NEAT decrease, and it's going to attenuate that post-surplus weight regain. And then it's also going to reduce incidences of overfeeding. So if you are, having a cheat meal or having a free meal, keeping yourself insulin sensitive will make sure that your nutrients are partitioning more towards muscle mass than fat. So definitely something to continue to include. It's also great for improving self-efficacy, mental health, decreased pain, and improving well-being. Not to mention if you do it first thing in the morning, getting some sun, gazing at the horizon, that's going to support vitamin D, mood, circadian rhythm, and downstream sleep quality. Go out for a morning walk, touch grass, you'll feel better. Now, steps is an interesting one. It's gotten a lot of publicity lately because it is so easy to implement. It's very low friction. How much? Well, we know that there's a linear relationship between steps and metabolic syndrome prevalence. And for every 1,000 step increase, we have a 10% decrease. So if you go from 5,000 to 6,000, you're decreasing your risk by 10%. From 6 to 7, another 10%. From 7 to 8, another 10%. 10,000 seems to be the happy spot. 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity physical activity equivalent helps to improve body composition, blood pressure, lipid profile. That 12,500 step range tends to be where the benefits knock off. 10,000 steps is also relatively easy to implement. Most of the friction around time to get those steps happen between 10 and 12. That's why my preference is to stick with 10,000 steps. It's relatively easy, low friction for most people. If you're in a situation where you're dieting at a higher level, getting 12 to 15,000 steps beyond, so 12 to 15,000 steps is going to give you beyond that benefit of attenuating for the decreases in NEAT, and you're actually going to dive into more fat loss. Beyond 15,000, there is a risk of increasing your fatigue accumulation and appetite being a limiting factor. So for gainers, high step counts can suppress appetite and demand more calories than they're comfortable consuming. But vice versa, in a deficit, too many steps can drive up your fatigue and drive your hunger way up. There's a happy balance here. And remember, steps come down to time. So if they don't have time and you don't have time, use intensity. More output, less time. So you could do 12,500 steps, or you could do 8,000 steps. That includes 30 minutes of moderate intensity cardio. It doesn't matter as long as you're still getting the same caloric burn from the output. Stress management. This is, again, a very hot button topic. I have some conflicting views on this. Pick a lever. Consistency matters more than technique. Whether you're using breathing, like diaphragmatic box breathing, it's cheap, it's immediate. You can do it post-workout or before bed to calm you down. You're journaling, morning routine, meditation, mindfulness, doesn't matter as long as there's something in place to reduce your stress. Movement practices are also great, but again, yoga, long duration aerobics, walking, it's active recovery for the nervous system, but it does accumulate fatigue. So there is a trade-off. You can do hot and cold exposure, but again, these are both stressors in either direction. If you do too much cold exposure, you'll blunt the response from exercise. You do too much heat exposure, you're actually going to get increased stress to the system. It does force parasympathetic dominance in both directions, but you have to make sure to dose it appropriately, and for everyone is different. Goal setting and scheduling can also be beneficial. Organizing your stress is still real stress, but knowing what you have in front of you can be a calming stimulus, and it can reduce your allostatic load. Sleep, sun, movement, stress management, that's like your low-hanging fruit here. Pick one, do it really well. If you have the ability to implement something else, try it, see how it works for you. But make sure that before you touch any supplements or biohacks, you have your lifestyle in order. That is my advice here. So now we're going to talk about goals, timelines, and controls. Alignment is the whole game, and 3 things have to line up. So what is your goal? Is your goal fat loss, muscle gain, recomposition? I have performance here, but honestly, we should be trying to maximize performance at all times. Then looking at what's the timeline. So based on, what the goal is, how lofty it is, can the change in physiology support it? Especially can the change in physiology support it and the time frame that we want to give it. So if someone comes to you and says, I want to lose 10 pounds in a week, you can say, cool, we can water fast and get you down 10 pounds, but you're not going to maintain it. Or if someone says, hey, I want to lose 100 pounds, well, that might be a 2-year goal or a 3-year goal, depending on their adherence and how well their body responds. So we need to be honest when we're looking at our timelines and understand that typically the slower the better. And we have to understand what controls is this person able to implement. We can't just go balls to the wall and demand 100% adherence from somebody who has very little in terms of experience. Okay. Don't ask someone tracking portion sizes to buy an Oura ring, right? You have to meet your clients and meet yourself where you're at. If you're misaligned with these, you're setting yourself up for failure, and you potentially might damage the confidence that you have that you could ever achieve the goal that you've set. And I think that would be the biggest disservice. So looking at the numbers, in terms of fat loss best practices, we're looking at like 0.7% of body weight per week. That's pretty fast. I tend to favor more so like 0.5 pound to 1 pound of weight loss per week. The more gradual weight loss will promote more fat mass loss versus muscle mass loss. And as a percentage of that decrease, you'll end up maintaining more of your muscle mass, preserving your performance, and feeling better over time. You'll also be able to layer in steps here so that you don't have to go whole hog right from the beginning. You can get small incremental gains from very small changes and manipulations to the diet. When it comes to muscle gain, this is where we definitely want to be slower. Here we're looking at 0.5 to 1.5% per month, not per week, per month. Whenever you gain weight, fat gain is inevitable, but by going slower, you can reduce the amount of fat you gain because you'll be less likely to run into those insulin sensitivity decreases, which will in turn favor fat over muscle. Gradual is always the best answer in both directions. And that's probably not what you wanted to hear because everyone wants results really quickly. But if you follow this channel, you got to be in this for the long haul. Okay. Long-term maintenance is identical between fast and slow weight loss when calories are equated. There are many studies that have repeated this, and that's what the research says. Personally, I find that the behavioral changes from going slow allow us to produce better results in terms of maintenance. There is an art and a science to coaching. The research might say one thing. My experience is the faster someone loses weight, the faster they regain it on the back end. If you don't take your time to establish those behavioral controls throughout the process, they're not going to be able to maintain them. The way you lose the weight is the way you maintain your weight loss. So if you lost the weight through unsustainable means, the weight loss will be unsustainable. Okay? This is where we really have to be careful in understanding the person in front of us. Fat weight loss is not the same as fast fat loss. Fast scale movement is mostly fluid, glycogen, lean tissue. Weight loss is not the same as fat loss. Fat loss changes body composition. Weight loss just changes you to a smaller version of yourself. This is where we can include diet breaks or mini cuts. Whether you're dieting for a really long time, taking a 1 to 2 week break where you bring calories up to maintenance can help with diet fatigue. It can also help resensitize the body's metabolic processes, increase that leptin, decrease that ghrelin, get your hunger signaling back in order, and then you're back into the diet. If you're in a situation where maybe you've pushed your surplus too far, you can implement a mini cut to kind of resensitize you to insulin, drop a little bit of body fat, and then put you in a position to be more productive in your weight gain on the back end. Evidence shows similar results when calories are equated. So again, it's an art and a science. So whether you do a prolonged gain or loss, or whether you include diet breaks and mini cuts in there, it doesn't matter. As long as the total calories are equated across the same number of weeks, the results will be the same. Adherence is the most important piece. This is why I always preach process over outcome. You need to build the identity, not the result. It's not, I want a great physique. It's, I want to be the person who has a great physique. Language matters more than anything. That's the reframe. You need to adopt the habits, behaviors, and structure of the person who has that goal. The physical results will follow. So a series of small goals building towards a larger one is going to be the way to get this done. Process orientation is what survives setbacks. So if you have a process orientation and you do falter, well, you just get right back into it. If you have a more outcome orientation, you're going to crumble as soon as things get hard, or you have the first off-plan meal or something comes up, right? We need to meet our clients where we are and bring them along in a stepwise fashion, understanding that every small win is a vote towards the confidence in that new identity. Here's something that, people want to look at and say, this is the end all be all when it comes to diet, is tracking. I personally don't think it is, but there has to be some sort of control, and the level of tracking should match the level of control needed. So we need to be tracking our intake and adherence in some capacity, whether we're tracking calories, macros, portion sizes, we have people on a meal plan, or it's, progress pictures, body weight. There has to be something in there that we're tracking to determine if what we're doing is working. Daily body weight is going to fluctuate, so I tend to focus on a weekly average. We can also use body fat percentage. We can measure resting heart rate, HRV, blood pressure, fasted blood glucose. Those are all going to be indicators of our insulin sensitivity and stress. And there's an opportunity to focus on some non-scale wins when you're going through these processes with your clients that will boost their confidence that change is actually taking place, but only track what you're going to use. Okay. We can also track recovery, hours of sleep and quality, subjective feelings of stress. If they're using a wearable, like, I use a Garmin watch, for example, which tells me I'm perpetually under recovered, yet I continue to perform at a very high level. We can also track mood, well-being. It doesn't matter. Only track what you're going to use. The last two is training and digestion. So track your progressive overload. Track your training versus rest days and how you're feeling. Track your digestion. Are you bloated? Are you having regular bowel movements? All of these things are going to indicate whether stress is coming up or stress is coming down or stress is stable. Okay. More data is generally better, but tracking can lead to some disordered habits. It can lead you to nocebo effects where you can gaslight yourself into having bad days. If your Oura Ring or your Garmin says that you're under recovered and you say, better not train today. Well, you just missed out on potentially a productive day of training. All of these use algorithms that are proprietary and none of them are 100% accurate. The other thing is you're better off to build the structure and the routine around training and nutrition and not base it off of what an app says. Just use the trends in the data to determine long-term whether you're making progress. I don't like to make acute decisions based on this type of data. I like to look at trends. I like to look at my performance, and then I use the data on the back end to see if it matches my subjective feelings. Okay. Tracking is just a tool. It's not the holy grail. And the scale is just data. It doesn't change who you are. Okay. So now we're going to go into fat loss. Okay. Now we understand the frameworks in the back end. Let's go into fat loss. We need a negative energy flux, which means we need to expend more calories than we're consuming. That's best achieved through a decrease in caloric intake and an increase in physical activity. Both levers, not just one. The intervention must be centered on adherence and habit building. If we're missing out on habit building and we're not getting good adherence, we will not get the results that we want. The timeline is going to be based on that 0.7% per week or 0.5 to 1 pound per week and the level of adherence the client can support. Okay, the values they hold and the tools available. This makes things highly variable. So if you have somebody, for example, one of my clients right now is he's a Muslim and he's heading into Ramadan, which means that he will be fasting for the time between sunrise and sunset. That's going to change his level of adherence to his nutrition plan, not to mention that this holiday involves a lot of celebratory meals. So the way that we timeline things, the way that we track has to change. And I have to scale the intervention to that client and meet him where he is. Okay. Then I can build a runway of progression. So they're not just jumping into the deep end, and he can build his self-efficacy, his confidence in his ability to follow the plan. And that's going to improve his adherence over time. So at every check-in, we need to monitor progress, iterate on the plan, identify some trends, and educate along the way. There has to be an emphasis whenever they hit roadblocks to bring awareness back to the evidence of success, what got them there, and assist them in moving back in that direction. The more momentum you build, the less setbacks you're going to have. And the only way to build momentum is to stack little wins. So the barriers to fat loss are going to be the same ones we identified in module 1. So metabolic adaptation is going to be the main barrier. NEAT drops, TEF drops, training output might suffer. Hunger is going to climb. Gut mechanoreceptors are going to increase hunger. We're going to have some hormone shifts with insulin dropping, cortisol coming up, thyroid and testosterone coming down. And there's also evidence of increased gut efficiency here, meaning less proton leakage in a deficit, meaning that the more of the food that you eat will be metabolized as energy than when you're in a surplus. So that's a really interesting lens to look at it through. It's like your body says, okay, I'm only getting in so many calories. I need to use them all, versus I'm getting in a ton of calories. I can be a little bit more wasteful here. There's also going to be shifts in your gut flora. So neurotransmitters are going to shift. Serotonin is going to drop. Dopamine is going to drop. And you're just going to increase your perception of stress. And also cortisol is going to affect sleep. So you're not going to be sleeping as well. These are all like long-term adaptations, not something that happens all at once, but it's something to keep in mind. So that's the whole landscape. Knowing it helps us pick tools and counter each one of these pieces along the way. So the 3 main tools for fat loss: 1, cardio. Okay. HIIT versus LISS. I tend to bias more towards LISS, so low intensity, steady state. HIIT will burn less calories during the session and more after the session via EPOC, so excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. It's half the time. It's way harder. It's way more fatiguing. But it does tax the recovery a lot. So you have to be careful with how you dose HIIT. I reserve HIIT for my clients who are very short on time. They do not have the ability to stack a ton of steps. They do not have the ability to stack a ton of cardio. They have to get the most out of the least. That's where I put in HIIT. That's like the only situation. I'm much more biased towards LISS. You burn more calories during. Takes twice as much time, unfortunately. It's less challenging. It doesn't tax recovery. And it's actually more effective, in my experience, in reducing all-cause mortality. It just depends on the preference, the recovery capacity. When calories are running really low, just bias towards the lowest intensity exercise you can do, because they're not going to have enough energy to actually push those HIIT sessions to the level they need to get the results. NEAT also drops precipitously the deeper you get into a deficit. Like I mentioned, in bodybuilding prep, I'm talking quieter, I'm moving slower, it takes me longer to get out of my car, all these things. Step goals alongside cardio help you maintain that. So as long as you're maintaining a step count of whatever steps that you're having and that gets maintained, you can stand to reason that you can minimize the decrease in NEAT. The next lever we can pull during a diet is actually protein overfeeding. This is something that I tend to do quite often with my clients. Is I'm going to increase their protein intake above that 1 gram per pound, because 15 to 30% of those calories are going to be burned as heat. There's going to be higher satiety rates. We're going to preserve fat-free mass. It's going to mitigate metabolic adaptation through these two mechanisms, because if we maintain more muscle mass, our resting metabolic rate won't drop as much. And there's also an argument for recompositioning with higher protein. So even up to 2 grams per pound of body weight has been studied with no deleterious effects. The only contraindication is if you have existing kidney disease, or if increasing your protein intake does affect your recovery, because it does digest slower. So putting this all together, I personally bias towards carb and calorie cycling once we get deeper into a diet, but we have to be careful with the level of adherence. So number one, set the weekly average calories and keep every day the same. This is going to drive that energy flux down and set the stage for fat loss. As we get in deeper into the diet and we need to preserve training performance, this is where we're going to put training days at a slight surplus, so we have the fuel necessary to perform at a high level. Then we can put rest days in a deficit, which will, again, balance out that weekly caloric intake. So if you're taking in, let's say, 14,000 calories a week, that could be 2,000 calories every day, or it could be 1,500 calories on 3 days of the week, and then that'll put you at 4,500. So then, divide those remaining calories, you're going to be in a slight surplus, probably around 2,300 calories on your training days. And as progress demands, adjust the weekly average calories down, keeping the orientation towards the goal. Okay. In my opinion, you should try and keep your protein stable across both days. Carbs are going to be higher on training days, lower on rest days. Fats maintain about 20% of your total calories across the whole week. Training days can dip below, rest days pull it back up, so that you have some undulation in your macronutrient intake to better leverage hunger signaling, because fats do digest slower and increase satiety. We also have to remember palatability, because food choices kill your diet. Like if your client or you do not like the way that you're eating, you will not sustain it. So if someone prefers a higher fat diet and that's something that they could eat for the rest of their lives, they might do better dieting on higher fats. Even though, in my opinion, higher fats are not going to be as good for performance, that might be what's most sustainable for that person. I will say right from the get-go that most people do not need this level of complexity. Experience level, lifestyle predictability, and the actual need to put these things in place will dictate whether they get put in place or not. I usually reserve these for higher end physique or weight class manipulations, or my clients who take this stuff very, very seriously. But the reality is most people can get a lot of work done either tracking portion sizes or doing simple macro math. Okay? Calories matter most. On the muscle gain side, the fun side, right? We need to have a positive energy flux through increased intake, but we do not want to decrease energy expenditure. This is something that I would reserve. Like, the only instance where I would reduce energy expenditure is if I had somebody who was friggin' tiny and had a brutal time gaining weight or eating enough food. I would bring their exercise down. For the most part, we want to keep exercise the same, because energy expenditure, is a stimulus for nutrient turnover and partitioning, which means that more of the food that you eat will go towards building muscle rather than accumulating body fat. The only time we will ever drop expenditure is when your appetite is limiting your intake and you cannot eat enough to support that expenditure. That 0.5 to 1.5% body weight gain per month, slower the better. Make it around the client's ability to adhere, build a runway, and make sure that they feel confident every step of the way for themselves to follow the plan. The barriers here, insulin sensitivity is the primary one. As we gain more weight, we become less insulin sensitive, mostly due to increased carbohydrate intakes. This can lead to hyperinsulinemia and then insulin resistance. That'll shift you towards gaining more fat than building muscle, especially around the midsection where it is the most deleterious to your health. Appetite is going to be the second barrier. You're just eating more food, right? So you're going to be more full. There's more load on the GI tract. And not to mention that as your appetite goes down, you won't be able to support the caloric needs that you have to gain the weight, right? Protein is very satiating. Fats are going to slow gastric emptying. So you're going to want to drive most of your caloric intake through carbohydrates. Neat is the double-edged sword, right? You want to have enough to support health and metabolic processes and nutrient partitioning, but you don't want so much that it drives up your energy requirements to the point where your appetite can't keep up. And then lastly is digestion. I touched on it a little bit, but large food volumes are going to stress the digestive tract. So making sure to manage bloating, indigestion, and inflammation all become barriers to calorie consumption. How do we work against this? To me, again, the same way we did nutrient timing approach for fat loss to preserve training performance, we're going to do the same with muscle gain to prevent insulin resistance. So this is where we can drive a ton of carbohydrates around that peri-workout nutrition. So pre-workout, elevate and maintain blood glucose, top up your glycogen stores. It's not as important as total daily carbs, but acute dosing can improve performance. Intra-workout, we can also have some carbohydrates. Again, this is very liquid carbs are going to be really easy for your body to digest. It'll delay glycogen depletion and liver mobilization. So that wall you hit after your main movements and into your assistance work, it'll get rid of that. It'll reduce your cortisol response and it'll reduce the serotonin response that hits in that like block where you finish your squats and you go into your assistance work and you're just pooched. A lot of that is due to drops in blood glucose, drops in serotonin. So by supplementing with carbohydrates, we can increase our neural drive and increase our engagement in the session. Lastly is post-workout. So post-workout, we have increased GLUT4 translocation, which is the main shuttle molecule for carbohydrates into the muscle. Those are upregulated. So having carbohydrates during that time will speed up glycogen replenishment and further trigger muscle protein synthesis through driving up insulin. When daily protein and carb totals are equated, you have most of your bases covered. Okay, so if the session is over 60 minutes or total caloric requirements can't be met from whole food, peri-workout liquid carbs is the easiest way to go, and there's literally no drawbacks. Post-workout protein can also increase muscle protein synthesis acutely, independent of food intake. More frequent feedings can have a positive chronic impact on muscle protein synthesis, though. So you don't want to only consume protein around training. You want to dose it evenly throughout the day, typically at least 30 grams to make sure that we're crossing that leucine threshold. But I wouldn't get too much into the weeds here. I would also limit fats around training because fats do slow the gastric emptying process and blunt insulin response. And we don't want that when we just had carbs and we're ready to train. Push fats earlier in the day or later in the day away from training. Putting this all together, again, carb and calorie cycling, same logic as the fat loss side, but in reverse. So switching between surplus and deficit days prevents insulin sensitivity loss. A few deficit days inside a gain phase also can preserve appetite. It lets you eat more food on the surplus days and improves the variety and gut flora resilience. So essentially, you're just taking that same average calories and you're raising that average calories per week up, but you're keeping a delta of about 3 to 1,000 calories between your training day and rest day as you move up, so that you're hungrier on your rest days and you're more apt to eat your food on your training days. We can also implement post-workout walks, so just short 10-minute walks, famous from Mr. Stan Efferding himself, to help improve insulin sensitivity and better nutrient partitioning. We can also include, if you've pushed it too far, including a mini cut, totally reasonable. Same rationale as a diet break. You're just resensitizing the body to leptin and ghrelin, upregulating those hormones that are required for fat loss. 2 weeks, drop your calories significantly, bring them back up, and then you'll be resensitized. Okay. It also, like, the less fat that we have, the less propensity we have to convert testosterone to estrogen, which can be a main driver for further fat gain. And the more body fat we carry, the more our body wants to do this instead of building muscle. These are going to be used strategically, has to be data driven, and every deficit you enter costs you lean mass, especially if you're a natural athlete. So my preference, gain weight slowly over, a long period of time, like 36 weeks, rather than really fast over 12 weeks and then having to do a mini cut. I would much rather spend time just chipping away, raising calories very slowly, only as needed, using all of our biometrics as a feedback, than to push it too far and have to pull it back. So the takeaways here, different goals on different timelines. All right. They're going to require different needs, but the same playbook doesn't work twice. We have to know the roadblocks. Most of them are predictable once you understand metabolic adaptation, which you should by now. And that's the whole point of what we just talked about. And the lens you need to look at all of this through. I've given you a ton of tools for your toolbox. Some jobs need a pin hammer. Some jobs need a jackhammer. You need to know which one to choose. You're not going to give that person who has no experience tracking food a very complex meal plan with 50 different food types. You're just not going to do it. It's not going to work. The process doesn't have to be linear, and it probably won't be. And I will say that if it's not linear, it's probably going to be more beneficial for them. Take it low, burn it slow, whether it's weight loss or weight gain. We want to move in the most sustainable direction possible so that you're in the best position and the best health, and that performance is kept very high throughout. So how do we apply this practically? I mean, the 8 priorities at every check-in are the same for fat loss and weight gain. Are we adherent? Are we trending towards the goal? Is training output stable? Are biomarkers stable? Are we mitigating metabolic adaptation? Are we maintaining quality of life? And are we setting up life after the diet? Quality of life, I think, cannot be understated subjectively and relative to the goal. Like, a bodybuilding contest prep is going to suck regardless, but that's going to be a very small percentage of your clients. For the most part, people are going to have staff parties, they're going to have vacations, they're going to have family events. Whatever you put in place needs to accommodate for that so that they can actually enjoy their lives. If there's too much friction between the behaviors that you're requiring and the lifestyle that they want to live, you will not get adherence from your clients. Okay, and when it comes to life after the diet, monitor for disordered eating behaviors, excess food focus, communicate about the exit plan before you arrive to it, and make sure that they know what's coming. Okay, that will solve a ton of your problems here. So where do the answers to these questions come from? Number one, adherence, self-reports, check-in sheets, screenshots of a tracking app, collaborative reviews. If they're following the plan, great, move on. If they're not, look at why and educate them. The next is orientation to the goal. Okay, so are we progressing to where we want to be? Is the scale moving? Are the progress pictures looking better? Is the body composition data, the body fat percentage, whatever you're using to track that? This is objective feedback. If it's trending well, great. If not, let's look at the data, figure out why. Training output cannot be understated here. I've mentioned it a few times. Maintaining training output is the number one priority, whether you're gaining muscle or losing fat. If you're not progressively overloading and you're not making progress in the gym, you can assume that you are not gaining muscle. Muscle gain and logbook, synonymous. One is a proxy for the other. Monitor stress, perceived and measurable. So high stress weeks may require a pullback or maybe a maintenance for a couple weeks. The intervention doesn't have to be linear. Look at resting heart rate, look at HRV, look at how they're perceiving their stress day to day, their sleep quality. All of these things matter. Monitor blood work, right? Some goals will cost biomarkers. Contest prep is a great example of this. Your metabolic situation will be completely fucked after a contest prep. but that's par for the course. Have an exit plan. They knew that going into it. They committed to it. It's not a surprise, but you have to monitor. Ignorance isn't bliss. Ignorance is stupid. Okay. Metabolic adaptation. Look at calorie intake trending over time, changes in NEAT. When a fat loss client dips below like 1,200 to 1,000 calories, this is where you're going to want to look at what you're doing and make sure that you're not setting them up for failure down the road, because these high caloric numbers or these low caloric numbers, they do have a cost associated with them. And then monitor their quality of life, self-reports, the relationship that they have with their partner, the relationship that they have with you and how they're communicating. Have open conversations about life outside the diet, their partner, their children, their work. Food exists as part of our social structure, so you cannot look at it in a vacuum. And then in life afterwards, again, monitor for disordered patterns, communicate the exit before it arrives, and make sure that they know what's coming and they'll be set up for success. So some general guidelines for dietary adjustments here. Carbs are for performance, fats are for health, protein likely remains unchanged day to day. Okay, we need to eat enough protein to support muscle protein synthesis. That's it. You should manipulate your carbs first. Carbs are going to drive performance. So as your carbs drop during a deficit, you risk lower performance. As your carbs come up in a surplus, you risk insulin sensitivity. So there is a risk associated with it. Fats, I would prefer to keep fats at the floor. Maintain at least 20% fats across the week. Only push them higher when carbs are capped via appetite. And then the fats basically just fill the gap when carbs can't go higher. Like I have a client eating like 800 grams of carbs right now. We're going to increase his fats because he needs more total calories. The goal is to always aim to keep a caloric flux as high as possible, meaning you're eating the most amount of calories you can to achieve the goal, and you're performing the most amount of physical activity to achieve the goal. If you can keep calorie flux, so the total amount of energy out and the total amount of energy in, as high as possible, you will mitigate most metabolic adaptations. Metabolic adaptations typically take place when we decrease calories in. So if we can keep exercise up, keep calories up while we lose fat, we're in a good spot. When we're gaining muscle, we're going to want to keep energy expenditure up to minimize the loss of insulin sensitivity, and we're going to be in a better place. Calories are one tool. Lifestyle modifications like improving sleep, managing stress, increasing NEAT, leveraging thermic effect of food through the single ingredient whole foods, high protein, more fiber content. Address those low-hanging fruits first, pun intended, because you should be eating a ton of fruit. Make sure they've got good habits, their behavior is in line with the goals that they've set, and you're helping them to increase their confidence so they have less limiting beliefs. The more data you have, the better, but adherence matters most. Okay, tracking is just a tool. So don't track data unless you're going to use it, because tracking's too much is definitely going to be increased risk factor for disordered habits. Okay. Caveat here is if there's a weight class, you're probably going to want to make sure that the scale is trending in the right direction. So as you can see, like this is about way more than calories and macros, and how you navigate any nutritional intervention has downstream effects on your health or your client's health, their well-being, their happiness, their family life, and potentially years beyond that. Don't take this lightly. It's a serious responsibility, and I mean that from my heart. I've seen time and time again coaches destroy the client's relationship with food. I've seen them ruin relationships by asking too much of the client for what they're willing to do or what their values align with. Different goals demand different tools, different levels and experiences demand different levels of complexity, and you need to know which tool to use at what time for what person. At the end of the day, results matter. The how is up to you. It's the art and science of coaching. But you need to communicate the how to the client and make sure that they are in alignment, their values are in alignment, and their commitment is in alignment with what you're asking them to do. And if it's not, you adjust the timeline. You can achieve any goal if given a long enough runway. So let's make sure that we orient our clients and their behaviors to their values and give them realistic timelines to achieve those goals. This is core to my entire coaching philosophy. Coach the person, not the program. Physiology is only going to matter as much as the psychology allows. Training, nutrition, they're all just vehicles for personal development. You're teaching people how to drive, you're not driving them. So hopefully this was useful. I know I went into a lot of detail. We're looking at close to an hour of a video, but this is the kind of stuff you can expect from Coach's Corner University. I'll be relaunching it soon, but if you want more of these videos or you want me to deep dive into more topics, please let me know in the comments below. And I will say, most of you are non-subscribers, so please support the channel, support me, click that subscribe button, and we'll catch you in the next video.